But we think I'll get to joy, but I'm going to push this stuff aside. The way to the other side of the valley is not around it, it's through it. And that is when we don't go through our emotions, we don't get to the other side of the valley truly.
Anthony, welcome back to the podcast. It's so good to see you again.
It's so good to see you too. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we're going to have a good conversation today. I want to dive right in. You have had quite an illustrious career in the music industry, but I want to start right here. And this is sort of what piqued my interest to say, yeah, I want to talk to Anthony again, because you set music aside for a season to focus on your mental, spiritual, and personal health. Take us back, Anthony. What was going on?
Yeah, well, I just felt like there was too much going on, honestly. Like that's the bottom line. I think that a lot of times work, especially ministry, can become a distraction for actually or outpouring. Like outpouring actually, because it's a good thing, can actually become a way to kind of to mask or disguise actual issues that you need to work on. And for me, I put aside making new music. I was still on the road and singing and doing that, but I put aside making new music because I didn't want it to come from this obligatory, kind of robotic, I just do this kind of place. I wanted it to be an authentic experience, and it couldn't be until you actually work some things out. So between, which we discussed this the last time I was with you, which I love that.
Yeah.
The loss, the grief, the figuring out a way to do ministry from a place of overflow and not digging the bottom of the barrel. All those things were things I needed to stop and actually work out. So being kind to myself and giving myself the grace to do that, knowing that like that's part of being a human. You're not a machine. You know what I mean? You're not like just fill up with some fuel and you're good. Like that's not how it works.
Yes.
So
yes.
I had to push pause in order to be better, and then not allow the fact that other people weren't having to push pause make me get anxious. So I come out of my place of pause. So that's what I had to do.
Okay, so this is interesting, and I want to double click on this. How did you know the difference between pouring yourself out, serving, working from obligation versus I'm filled up, stirred up, and able to actually give something I have? How do you discern that difference?
I think if there is an overarching fatigue, if there's an overarching, if I compared it to my voice, I know when my voice needs to rest because the tone of my voice changes. Like there is an actual tone, there's a scratchier tone, there is more effort. I'm pushing hard to do something that I normally can just execute. There are signs of inflammation, and the only way you stop the inflammation is you stop putting pressure, whether it's an inflamed ankle, or inflamed vocal cords, or an inflamed soul. You have to stop putting pressure on your soul for the inflammation to go down, for you to actually address it. So that's how I could tell. There are signs, there are emotional signs that you're inflamed. Like there's something about your soul that's actually needs a break right now.
Yeah, go right there. What are the signs? I love that metaphor. What are the signs of inflammation of the soul?
I think when your acts of service, when your duty it becomes laborious. And I don't mean like today's a hard day. I mean there's something. I believe that our emotions, when you're in tune with your emotions, they're indicators. There are certain things that happen, and they vary. But just like a check engine light comes on in a car, it's indicating to you something needs to be looked at. I believe that there are check engine lights, check soul lights, check emotion lights that come on inside of us that can look like, again, things being really hard to push through. You showing up for ministry, but you just are like, I wish that today I could have somebody minister to me. Like that's an okay feeling to have. And sometimes it takes you sitting down to get poured into. I think when your connection to the Lord is kind of suffering for the sake of ministry, take a beat. There's nothing wrong with taking a beat to get things realigned. I'm generalizing because it's very hard to pour out blanket statements on everybody, but I think individuals, there are certain things that you go through and feel where it's like, oh, this isn't good for, like, ministry is not benefiting my soul right now. It's been consistently that way. That to me is when it's not just a tweak, it's a sprain, and you have to get off of putting pressure on that area for that sprain to heal.
Yeah, let's get practical. What did you do specifically?
I became wildly honest with my circle of friends and people around me. There's a circle that I have that I'm so grateful for. I was actually on the phone with one of them right before I started talking to you, where it is a acceptance without having to perform for it kind of nature of a relationship. Like there are relationships where you can come as you are. That to me is that's huge. For me, a big part of it is therapy. Like I don't, I'm so we talked about this last time I was with you. I'm such a proponent of Jesus and a therapist for some of us.
For sure.
Like that's the same thing as me saying a teacher and a tutor. Like some people, like me, in algebra class needed tutoring. I had a book of truths and I had formulas that all have an answer because it's just what it is. But I could not get to that answer on my own. And I would have failed without admitting I need a tutor. So I think a lot of us have a book of truths. We have formulas in scripture, but we need help on how to be anxious for nothing. Or we need help on patience, or we need help. So I viewed therapy to me as tutoring to help me execute biblical principles in my life. So relationships, therapy, and there are ways to get to therapists. Some people feel like that's something that's like a privilege. But there are platforms, and there's a link on my Instagram to a platform that can help you connect to a therapist. And then spiritually, I think spiritually to get poured into whatever that is, whether it's, obviously the traditional church scenario, but setting yourself up to make sure that you are not just doing what some of us in faith can do so easily, which is going to a place of like autopilot, where we are saying the right things, doing the right things, but the heart and the spirit behind it isn't connected. So that you're not connected to the actual source of the things that you're saying. So you just start to drain. You're not being consistently filled up as you're pouring out. So those are just a few things that have been wildly beneficial to me.
I love that. I want to get under the hood of that because I think it's sort of a two-part question. Number one, that level of self-awareness for all of us requires what? Okay, so that's part one, and we can go there. And then the part two is anxious for nothing. Be anxious for nothing, like Philippians 4 says, or Isaiah 26:3. He will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on him, whose heart trusts in him. What does that look like on Monday? So
Yeah.
let's talk about the self-awareness component first, and then walk me through the practicality of, as you did with your mentor, a friend,
Yeah.
anxious for nothing means what? When you're on tour right now, like on the road, what does that mean?
It means, well, there's two sides to it. I can start. I'm trying to figure out which side to start on because I'm ADD and my mind's like,
Yeah, you're
squirrel.
good. Let's go to the self-awareness part. Like, how do we get to the self-awareness to know we need it first, and then unpack to whatever extent you want?
I think, first of all, I think everybody needs to be self-aware on a level that sometimes we aren't because we're so busy and doing so much. I think for me, the way, and I would say this for most people, the way that I am able to hear myself and to hear the voice of the Lord is when I'm quiet. And I mean intentionally quiet. And in this world of open your phone and start flipping, when it is quiet, you just open your phone and start scrolling and then it's loud again. You have to be so intentional. And this may sound all, super artistish and all weird, but when I have gotten quiet, I have literally heard the voice of the Lord in ways I haven't heard before. I have heard the 13-year-old Anthony inside of me literally speaking to my spirit and telling me what he needs. Like it is, and that sounds kind of crazy. There is a inner voice that we all have, and we obviously have the Holy Spirit, but I believe if there is in addition to that, there are parts of your soul that God allows to speak to you and tell you what you need. Like I literally I was in a place of being wildly codependent and having people who were not good for me in my life. And it was literally like I heard the voice of the Lord via the 13-year-old me saying, run. Like you are doing you are operating in a space where you are dealing with value issues from your childhood. And that's why you're allowing these people into your life and trying to prove that you're valuable enough to keep them there. But I only heard that when I was quiet. Otherwise, it was like I'm just doing. I can almost disguise dysfunction within the Lord. Like I'm doing it, and I'm pouring into people. And I'm doing that stuff, and it's like, no, Anthony, you're codependent, and you're becoming a victim to your own compassion. That's what you're doing, and you're disguising that in ministry. So the only way you get to those kind of deep realizations is by you have to be still and allow the Lord to speak to you, and you allow space for you to hear your own thoughts. Because there are a lot of times where the Lord is quiet and it's been like, Anthony, I already gave you this answer. Like, I'm quiet right now because you already know the answer. My mom used to always say that to me. You know what to do. She would say that as an answer to some questions because she knows she instilled in me the thing to do. So when the Lord is quiet, I get with me and go, what has he already taught you? And that's the differentiation between him saying something and then you being like, this is in the vault from something he said earlier.
And you use the phrase disguising dysfunction, and I want to stay there. How do we, and in what ways do we disguise dysfunction that we don't know are disguises? In other words, how do we trick ourselves? How do we placate the dysfunction? How do we tolerate it? How do we empower it? Deceived people don't know they're deceived. That's my point.
Right. Totally. I mean, oh my gosh, that's a whole podcast in and of itself because there's so many different ways that we do it. There's so many different ways that people are doing it and we don't realize it. Like I had a scenario recently where I had a run-in with somebody because I won't tolerate. I'm in this place now where I won't tolerate disrespect. I just won't do it. That's a commitment I've made to myself. I will, have the conversation if I need to, because sometimes that just happens on accident. But I am keenly aware now that an apology came from them because they needed something from me now. Like it was dead silent, but then when they needed something from me, an apology came, and I had to be aware of, Anthony, this is a tactic to get you back in service of them. But the only way you realize that is if you are aware of that stuff. And that to me takes education. It takes, there's so many different angles of being educated yourself, of being keenly aware of the Spirit of God talking to you and going, nope, that's not it. I mean, it manifests itself in so many different ways. And it can also be done via me, like not just somebody doing it to you. It can be me, the codependent tendencies coming back because I just want to be valuable. Or I just want you to know that I am good enough to be here. So I will sacrifice my well-being to make sure you're okay. And there are certain jobs that I believe are only made for God and the Holy Spirit. Like there are certain scenarios where I'm not supposed to be sacrificing my well-being at that level to help fix somebody, because there's a certain point where only the maker knows how to do the fixing. You can go get windshield wiper fluid anywhere, but if there's a part that needs to be, you have to take it to the manufacturer to get the part. And I'm not the manufacturer of your life. So there's a point where I stop. I can do certain things, but I step into roles. I used to step into roles. And again, I'm getting kind of all over the place, but it's so many different angles. There comes a point where we have to be aware enough where we are stepping into the manufacturer's role, because that's never our role.
Dang, Anthony.
And be willing to walk away at those moments.
You said something quickly, and I think it really deserves some more time. You talked about being keenly aware of the Spirit of God, and I want to juxtapose that against what we've been talking about. We can use adversity, difficult circumstances. We could call that noise, right?
Yes.
When there's noise in life, I think we have a reflexive posture that's sort of frantic. And then here's the picture, like we're out in the open sea and we're flailing for help.
Yes.
And in that posture of being frantic from the inside out, the still small voice is speaking, but we can't discern it. So if we juxtapose the noise and the frantic posture of the soul versus the still small voice of God, I've set the Lord continually before me. Because he's at my right hand, I shall not be moved. Whatever we focus on flourishes in life. What does it require of us? What did it require of you to recognize noise, number one, and to move in the opposite spirit of it so that you can tune yourself and become aware of the still small voice who's always speaking?
Yeah, what it required of me is to realize that the noise does not work. When it comes to me being, if I want to progress emotionally, spiritually, physically, any of that stuff, the noise does not help me get to that goal. And so that's countercultural, because we're in a culture where do the most, do more, do more, do more. That's like have a noisy life, which is literally saying drown out the still small voice of the Lord. So you have to be almost like countercultural in your approach, or I have to be countercultural in my approach, because as soon as my life is noisy, I can't hear him, which is what you were just saying. If me and you were trying to do this podcast in a restaurant right now, it would not be working. It would literally be like, I can't focus. I can't concentrate. What'd you say? I can't hear you. That is what, and if you refuse to start yelling, and if you refuse to join the chaos, then I'm going to have to resituate myself, because your voice is going to be what it is. So I think I've had to get to the point where I'm like, oh, I'm not progressing. My progress is actually messed up when I don't get myself in a position where I can hear that voice. And when hearing the voice of God becomes your priority, then you start to make the moves that are necessary. And then once you make those moves, hear his voice, and then do something he says, and see the benefit of making the moves to hear his voice, it's way easier to be like, no, I have to do this for me to hear his voice. Even though it looks crazy to you that I'm not taking advantage of whatever opportunity, I'm going to be still right now.
I love that you said, I love that you said you recognize you're able to recognize when you are not progressing. Now, I've been thinking about pace and how we all can confuse activity for vitality, but activity and busyness doesn't mean we're thriving. How do you discern the difference? And I want to go back to your statement, I'm not progressing. Like, how do we discern that difference?
I think when the way I've discerned the difference is when peace is accompanying the moves that I make. If I am blazing through life and doing a whole bunch of things, but I am chaotic on the inside, to me, that is an indicator. That is the Lord telling you, your soul telling you to stop. Like, and I'm not saying today's a hard day. I'm talking about when peace is not accompanying you. I believe that is a telltale sign. Am I doing what I'm called to do? Yes. But am I at peace? Am I on a base level at peace? Like, today's a hard day, but I'm at peace. That to me is the indicator. And at this point in my life and in my career, when I do not feel peaceful, I am more than okay saying no, because you cannot go out, you cannot take an opportunity and then go write a check for peace after you just forsook your whole calling and compromised yourself. You can't take whatever benefit you got. And I say write a check, meaning anything. You can't go buy peace after you do a bunch of stuff that you weren't supposed to be doing. So that's how I look at it. Is this going to help me toward my goal of peace, which is part of what, to me, like, that's part of what it means to be walking with the Lord, is he says that I will give perfect peace to you. So I'm like, there you go. There's an indicator that I'm on the right path.
Wow. Well, let's go back to what we were talking about earlier, the friend, the mentor of yours.
Yes.
You're talking about being anxious for nothing. So let's just set this up. You're on the road right now. Anxious for nothing. He will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on him, whose heart trusts in him. On Monday, what does that look like, and how do you employ that truth so that you live it out?
Yeah, I think on Monday, what it looks like, Monday looks like what I've set up myself over the last 2 years to get this Monday to look like this. That's what Monday. So it's hard to just say what Monday looks like, but basically, the foundation of my home in LA, because of the shifting of, the nature of earthquakes, the foundation of my home in LA was built in such a way that if there is shaking, the foundation is on these like roll or some kind of way that it shifts. It is set up to shift with something shaky, so that if there's a crazy earthquake, I will feel the shaking, but my house won't fall. I will feel the shaking and may have to put some pictures up, but it won't be like the structure falls because it was retrofitted for the shaking. Peace today looks like the retrofitting that I did yesterday for today. That's what peace is, a reflection of that retrofitting. So, I know myself. So when I'm on the road right now, I'm in a hotel room because there are buses parked outside of a venue, but I know me, and this is it's minuscule, but it's on tour. I can't sit on a bus all day, every day for 2 months with 12 other people and I can't do that. So I have to retrofit me knowing, okay, Anthony, set this aside because some days you're going to have to get your own hotel room to have a moment, to get a peace, to set yourself up preemptively for the second month of this where you didn't do that. And then you're stressed out because you didn't think about what it takes to not be stirred up. So that's a small example, but it's about proactively setting yourself up. That to me is how you ultimately get to a place of peace. And I mean in all areas. And this is me on a tour in a hotel room, but I'm saying in all areas. Like being with my family can be triggering for me, or being with certain individuals, my family can be triggering for me. So I'm saying this as an example. Not I actually don't have that issue, which I'm grateful for, but I'm going to set myself up proactively with buffers in the scenario that I'm going to do. I'm going to set my heart up to spectate and not be in it that far. I mean, you have to proactively set yourself up so that you can maintain that peace in the scenario. To try to build a foundation during a storm doesn't work. You have to do it before or after. And peace looks like thinking about that before you get into the storm, if that makes sense.
Yeah, anything else you want to say about that? We can't build a foundation in the middle of the storm. That is powerful. That talks about having long-range vision, being a person who's prepared. Anything else that would be helpful for us to know about life in that way through that metaphor?
Yeah, I just think that people sometimes can be discouraged because they're currently in a storm and feel like I can't build anything now. What you can build right now is set yourself up for as soon as I'm in a calmer place, I'm going to proactively set myself up. So the next storm, it will come. It's life. It is what it is. But I'm going to make sure that I am set up or learn in this scenario that I'm in now, that's actually a mess. I'm going to tell myself, you can't ever do this again. You can't invest in people like this again. You can't, and write that stuff down. And when you're done with this, or when you're on your way out of this, you start immediately investing in the future so the next storm doesn't feel like this. First, go ahead, if that makes sense.
Oh, it's so good. You sort of segued this conversation for me because as you were talking about using the example of getting a hotel room when the buses are out there, talk about, through the lens of this pause that you've come out of, talk about the role boundaries have played, are playing, and will play going forward in your life. Boundaries and relationships.
Boundaries have become my best friend. And I don't mean over the top boundaries, but the way I think about boundaries is this. If you're, if we're dealing with a football game, let's just say, because it's football season right now. If there were no
Go Lions.
lines, yeah. We don't have to get into all that. I'm just saying. If there were no lines drawn on a football field, if there were no hash marks, if there were no yard lines, if there was no boundaries, what then would the game be? There would be nothing. There would be nothing. There'd be people grabbing a football and running up through the stands and running around. The boundaries create the premise for the actually what needs to get accomplished that day. That's the goal. So I believe that when we don't set up boundaries, we are setting ourselves up for a free-for-all, which is never going to get us to our goal the way we wanted to get to it. So I have looked at it, within reason. I think at this point, boundaries can be an avoidant kind of thing. I have boundaries, so I don't want to talk about it. It's no, you need to actually talk about that. But so that people can use boundaries as a crutch, but I believe it has gotten me to my goals faster. If I look at I can't help but talk in metaphors because my name is Evans and that's what we do in our house. But
your dad's the king of it. I love it.
Yeah. It is. I know that there is a camp I used to work at, and there was this big pond, and it was stagnant, and it was a mess. And what they ended up doing is that they just pushed in the borders of that. They pushed, literally drudged in the borders of that pond, and it actually started to flow. And when you put boundaries on it, and it looked like a smaller situation, it actually started to flow in a direction. It started to clean itself up. It became a place people wanted to go because the environment that it did when it was flowing gave it gave something people wanted to be around it. Just even because of the sound that it made, people wanted to be around it. So I think boundaries create a flow in the direction that we're naturally supposed to be going. And it creates an environment where we can start to our life purifies itself when you set up boundaries.
Boundaries create flow. I had never thought about it in that way.
Oh,
That's powerful.
well, it's been amazing for me. Like, and it's taken some work because I didn't have boundaries because I had value issues. Like, anybody want to come into my life? Come on. And especially if you're harder, then I'll be more valuable if I can prove that I'll be the one person that you're not hard with. Like, no, I mean, that's the most dysfunctional mindset ever. And it's going to hurt you so bad. So, but they've just, I've seen what they do, and it's been amazing.
You don't have to take this too far if you don't want, but I'm just curious about it. So I didn't have boundaries because I had value issues. Say
Yeah.
more about that. Like, what do you mean?
I didn't understand the concept of being accepted without having to perform for it. So even in a relationship, if the relationship feels easy, it would feel weird to me because why is this easy? Why am I not having to prove myself? Why am I not having to jump through hoops to make you okay? Because peace and healthy started to feel boring because because I was so accustomed to having to do the most and feel like that. And then you get a good moment and it's like, oh my gosh, I went through all that chaos and now it's a good moment. Yay. But you have no idea that you're setting yourself up for this. Like, it's like this dysfunction felt normal. And so that is the furthest thing from normal. And I think in this day and age, when you have value issues, you look for this as normal when it's actually this is what you should be looking for. This is what's going to keep your heart, your spirit, your soul, your emotions at perfect peace. But when you have value issues, you're looking for a ride.
Wow. Okay, so if dysfunction felt normal to you and that was normal, how did you recognize that it was actually dysfunctional? What did it take? Who did it take? And what happened
It
for
took
the cycle to break?
it took looking into people who could show me a reflection of myself magnified so I could see what was really going on. Like in the bathroom right here, when I shave, I lean into that magnifying mirror they have so I can make sure it's all like done right. And I wouldn't be able to see it without that mirror and that light. There's like a mirror and a light, and it reflects back to me bigger so I can do the work. It's not somebody else doing the work. It's the reflection onto you in a magnified way so you can see what is actually going on. That is what got me into a place. My friends and people who love me so much, and my therapist who's like, at this point, it's 8 years in. So she's invested going, this is not healthy. There was an actual point where she was like, Anthony, I don't ever tell, she's never told me what to do. She's never said, this is what you need to do, because therapists aren't supposed to do that. There was a case where she said to me, you are dealing with a malignant narcissist. You are literally dealing with, like, she had heard the stories I was telling her about somebody in my life and the stories and how I was hyperextending. And she said, if I were an oncologist, if my job were to cure people of cancer, I would make it my goal that everybody would walk out healed. But unfortunately, there would be times where I had to walk into a room and go, I'm so sorry, it's terminal. She said, Anthony, in the case of so-and-so, I'm so sorry, it's terminal. You have to let that die. There's no, and when I see the reflection of my actions in that way, and it's somebody who's been trained for 25 years on psychotherapy and mental health, and they're telling me something like that, that was a reflection where I couldn't ignore the truth that was looking at me. Like, for me to choose not to address that would be me ignoring, like having a mark on my face and just like being like, it's not there. I had people in my life who were that honest with me, and that's what created okay, here's the magnified reflection. Now it's your job to do the work to clean it up.
Jeez. What's easy to ignore then about our mental health? In other words, like what's really easy to overlook as a warning sign that we need to even pause as you have?
Our feelings.
Say more.
Our feelings are indicators. We, in the same way I mentioned earlier, check engine light. A lot of us on this, listening to this podcast, have ignored our feelings the way we've ignored a check engine light in a car. And we have driven it and driven it and driven it and driven it, not knowing that the ignoring the check engine light will create a breakdown later that is more costly. When you ignore your emotions, when your emotions are there to indicate, they can't be the engine. The truth has to be the engine of your life, but they are there to indicate to you that there is something that needs to be addressed. And I think in this day and age, we have glamorized trauma. We have glamorized people's, like, if I'm sad, I'm going to let it manifest as anger because in culture, being somebody who pops off quick and somebody who has something slick to say all the time, that's glamorized and kind of a vibe. Like, if don't mess with him, he's that to me is you are ultimately in the case of me, my anger was a disguise for sadness. That unaddressed, stuffed down, it manifests itself in a different way, and it has you handicapped. Like you think so. I think that's the biggest thing is feelings being there and not allowing the space to identify the feelings, knowing that the natural reset after you identify and work through your feelings is a place of joy. Like that's the natural reset. But we think I'll get to joy, but I'm going to push this stuff aside. The way to the other side of the valley is not around it, it's through it. And that is when we don't go through our emotions, we don't get to the other side of the valley truly.
It's really helpful. I want to swing the conversation. Folks, as you know, we are leaning into the holiday season for many of you, many of us. During the holiday season, what gets evoked are old feelings of grief. We miss our loved ones, especially this time of year. I want to talk about grief and really, Anthony, to the extent you're comfortable, the role grief has played even in this recent journey, because when there's change, there's a level of loss, and that loss has to be grieved. For you to take this pause as you have recently, did you have to revisit grief in any area of your life for the sake
Oh,
of deeper healing? And what happened?
yeah, always. I feel like there are always moments where you deal with grief to a specific level, speaking specifically to the loss of our mother and, the matriarch of our family. There's grief and you feel like I dealt with it at this level, and then there's a new level that gets introduced later. And unfortunately, this is a sad part of life. But yeah, I now am not afraid to face it because I know on the other side of it, the grief doesn't necessarily get smaller, but you grow around it as you continue to address yourself and your issues and your feelings that come up. You start to grow around the grief. And for instance, like I took a pause from music, but in writing this new album, I sat down and wrote a song to our mother. And that was a way, because I was dealing with my grief and could actually get the wherewithal to write the song, because I'm actually going to face this. I think one of the most beautiful kind of oh my gosh, my mind has just lost the word. Like a oh my gosh, what is it when you write something for your mom? It is a
Like a
not
tribute?
yeah, sorry, I don't know why my brain
You're
just
good.
went blank. I was like, what?
You're good,
But
dude.
yes, the most beautiful tribute to my mother came out of me actually being willing to face the grief, and I want her back. But in the meantime, I feel like there are ways that you can honor people through your grief if you're actually willing to go through it. And if all I can do now is either ignore it or honor my mom, I'm going to choose to honor my mom, not to ignore the grief. So I will get quiet with it. I will push through it. And there are different ways constantly that we are all four of us, all my siblings, and my dad, we're coming up with different ways to honor our mom as we face the grief. And I think that's the best thing that I can do now is create scenarios that are honoring to her. So, yeah.
How has grief changed? Rather, how has grieving changed for you? If I'm not mistaken, your mom passed late December 2019.
Yes.
And so at the time of recording, we're coming up on 4 years. And I know for me, and I can just reflect this upon my own circumstance, my own experience with the same. Like the first year of grief, there was a lot of shock. For me, Anthony, like the second year of grief, the realization of the permanence of her absence was harder than the first year of grief.
Mhm.
Then grief changed. Year three. Did you notice that the grief process changed for you, and how so?
Yeah, I did. Well, first of all, I did notice that the grief process changed, and it changes. Um, eh, eh, the biggest way right now is my dad just got engaged. That creates a whole nother level of. I told my dad, I don't care who it is. I mean, I don't care who it is. It could be Oprah, it could be Mary Poppins, and I would be like, you represent the fact that my mother is not here. So that's another level of the, and I've had to double down on dealing with that because it can literally some certain scenarios can happen within the grief where it kind of if you don't handle it correctly, I could just literally bottle up anger. I could allow I could allow the grief to give so much power to a circumstance that actually it tears me away from my family. And I had to go, I refuse to allow this circumstance and the grief to add another level of grief onto it by tearing me away from my family because my dad got engaged to somebody. And that's really, I had to tell myself that narrative because I had days where I woke up and was like, well, that's it. I'm not going to anything. I will not be around anything. I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to be there. Don't ask me to come to this. And I was like, this is anger, and you're going to allow, if you don't deal with it, you're going to allow that anger to take your family from you. You're going to allow this circumstance to take your family. And when I had that realization, it was a different level of processing, but there's always levels up on the grief. And I agree with you in that, but it's, are you willing to face the next level?
Now, this is really interesting because one emotion that you had just described is anger. Anger is a secondary emotion. So behind that anger is what? Deep sadness. Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Of course. That's
absolutely.
a lot of times. If we get quiet to hear the voice of God and we start to work on ourselves, we will, a lot of times, it is actually you're sad. But that sadness is a harder emotion. It's harder. It gets easier over time, but it's harder to go shed tears as opposed to say something slick or be like that. You know, anger's an easy emotion. Anger's easier. So I think a lot of times there's just an immense sadness. But I'm a big proponent and a big believer that you have to feel it to heal it. We say that in the book that we got on. You know, you have to feel it to heal it. There's like no way around it. So it's being willing to feel those feelings, to admit what they are and then feel them. Yeah.
What do you think people misunderstand about grief and grieving?
I think there's a misunderstanding that I will do these steps and then I'll be good. I think you'll do those steps, you'll progress, then you'll do some more steps, then you'll progress, then you'll do some more. I mean, that's a constant, you know, and you get to choose the rate at which you progress. Honestly, like when I start choosing to create scenarios that honor my mom, it helps progress the grief because now we're turning this into her legacy. And when you're doing things on behalf of your mother's legacy or on behalf of it makes it easier. It makes it easier. It doesn't make it better all the way, but it makes it easier.
Doesn't make it better, it makes it easier. That sort of infers in my mind this semantic difference between moving forward through grief and moving on sort of like, I'm going to take an eraser to that season of my life.
Yeah.
What have been some key steps for you, for your siblings, even your dad, especially in this fresh season? And I saw this on YouTube. I was like, oh my gosh, Pastor Tony got engaged. Wow.
Yeah.
And then just in reflecting upon my own experience, because the same thing happened in my life. What are some things that, for the value of relationship, for the value of legacy, what are choices that your siblings made with your dad through this to move forward, to honor your mom's legacy, yet to move forward in life? That you're holding two things in tension, and I'm even struggling to put language behind it while I've experienced it myself. All I can say is it is a tension to manage, not something to just solve.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's totally tension to manage. I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this. It's a tension to manage, and then you change narratives on the tension to make it more bearable. Like if this isn't, my dad getting engaged is not about him at all trying to replace our mother. Like
Not
he's
at
made
all.
it very
Right.
clear. Like that's not possible at all. That's not possible. But if I've changed the narrative on your dad has not been alone since he was 18. Like he does not know, he's 74. He doesn't know how to do this. And your dad didn't ask for any of this. Your dad wants your mom here. Your dad wants his dad here. Your dad wants life to be what it was.
Anthony.
And if this can breathe any kind of relief into the loss he has, see, actually the lady he got engaged to, her husband, they were familiar with our family. Like actually he used to work at the church, and her husband passed away as they were planning their trip to come to my mom's funeral. So
I heard that.
Yeah. So there's it's just like layers and layers and layers of chaos. But I have to change the narrative if this is going to help your dad in any way, and he's not trying to replace your mom, then do what it takes to allow this to help your father. Do what you can. Like, don't sacrifice your well-being and push yourself into things that are hurtful for you. But at the same time, if you can change the narrative on it, you might be able to go further than what you initially thought, because this isn't about replacing your mom. So I think there needs to be really intention in our heads as we deal with grief, no matter what it is. It can be loss, it can be whatever, where you create a narrative that's not a lie, but a real narrative that changes your focus onto what the good in this could be, and use that to take as many steps forward as you can without compromising your well-being.
Man, I don't know if you've heard of this book or not, but hearing what you're saying makes me think of it. The book is called Master of Change by a guy called Brad Stulberg. He's a professor at the University of Michigan. I'll put a link in the show notes, folks, but Anthony, check it out, Master of Change. And in it, he's talking about this, how when we experience order and then disorder, our reflex, our core desire is to, and we also had this during the pandemic, to get back to normal. But what if instead of order, disorder, order, it's order, disorder, reorder? We are moving with change and adapting to change, so that it's almost kind of like order, disorder, reorder, construction, deconstruction, reconstruction. The metaphor can span out however we'd like. The point is, and he has this phrase, rugged flexibility, that we would learn how to become ruggedly flexible in life. It sounds like what you and your siblings have done working through this has been a demonstration of what it means to be ruggedly flexible. You're moving forward, you're grieving, you're holding joy and sorrow in the same hand, and both can be held at the same time.
They can. And this whole scenario is where joy and sorrow meet. Like, it's literally like joy and sorrow in a pot, and it being stirred, but it's like oil and water, where they don't necessarily, you're trying to make them, you can stir as hard as you can, but it's just like, no, they just meet here. One's floating over here in the context of this one. It's just, it's life. But I love what you just said about order, disorder. No, you said order, disorder,
Disorder.
reorder.
That's it. XYZ, not XYX. Yeah.
Yes. It's not order again. It's reordering. And sometimes you're in the reorder, you're like, this is not the way things used to be. And okay, we'll deal with this, but it has to be reordered for right now. And that's how we are dancing. Our whole family right now is dancing. But within it, I still feel like progress is happening. And that's where this new music came from, is that progress. Like this scenario in my life being revived because of these things that are in place now. Life hasn't stopped lifing. I've gotten myself in a better position to deal with life when it's lifing.
How did grief show up in your body?
Oh man, I am my emotions are on 10. So that it's very, grief showed up as anger, grief showed up as being very short, that's impatience. Grief showed up, I know that those are kind of emotional reflexes, but in my body, I got real lethargic. And I was like, what? Like, I don't know, why am I so lethargic right now? And then I am a super believer in emotions figuring a way out. And if that way out is through physical, like shutting you down physically, that will happen. Like, your blood pressure will be high when you're stressed out and not dealing with it. Because your body's like, they don't see this indicator, let me give them another one. And for me though, it showed up in that way of being lethargic and that's where it was like, you need to rest, because the more you push, this lethargy is going to continue to go up. The more you push yourself, that's not going to help you get through this. Like, an athlete that's injured, that tries to push themselves through their injury, is going to get injured worse. Like, if Simone Biles in the 2020 Olympics that re-aired in 2021, if she wouldn't have said, I have the twisties, I am not here to make to be everybody's champion. She literally, it didn't make her less of an athlete. She just had to admit, if I try what I'm normally capable of, with this going on in my mind and my emotions, I will hurt myself trying to be everybody's champion. So she had to take that. So that I had to get into that place where it's like, I can't hurt myself trying to be everybody's champion. And so today I will not be performing for whatever that looks like. And that right there kept me from injury that I may not have been able to recover from. If I would have pushed, if she would have pushed herself through that, she could have injured herself to a certain way where she wouldn't have just set the record she just set a couple weeks ago with the most medals of any woman ever. She would have her career would have ended if she would have pushed through for the sake of all of us at home that were like, why aren't you doing it? So adapting that mentality.
And this is back to where we started this conversation. Folks, we're going to take this full circle because to use that exact example, she was aware of, here it is, signs of inflammation. Recognized the signs of inflammation and said, I have to pause in order to be better for the long haul. This incorporates boundaries. This incorporates self-care. This incorporates recognizing blind spots.
Yep.
I mean, we're full circle here, Anthony.
Letting people down, which boundaries do sometimes, but being like, that I have to let you down. I cannot make sure you're well and let myself down. Because at the end of the day, you move on and I have to live with me. So you're the only one that's with you 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So you making sure that you are good in the confines of what the Lord is, what the boundaries he's put around our life, that to me is you should be your goal. And then everybody gets to benefit from you at your max.
That's so good. Yeah. Anything else on grief, Anthony, that would be helpful for us to know?
I think as corny as it may sound, for anybody out there who's hurting and been through some pretty crazy stuff, allowing yourself, my mom loves sunsets. In my house in LA, there's like a roof, like you can go up on the roof. And I took a picture of my mom up there one night and watched the sunset and allowed the emotions to come that were begging me to get out. If you're in a position of grief and pushing yourself through and just, thinking that may be the way, it's just, okay, another day, let's go. I challenge you to do whatever it takes to allow yourself to feel. You might not cry a tear. You might just have, some deep internal thoughts, but allowing yourself to do that, because I don't think it's good for anybody to be moving at such a pace that you don't allow yourself to feel what naturally happens to all of us when we're grieving.
Man, that is so good. That is so good. Anthony, before I let you go here today, I want to hear about the new music. I love your music. And I'd love to know, even through not only the pause, but the stuff we've talked about today, like how has all of this affected your art, your writing? Like, did you find yourself going to another level of writing that you hadn't been before?
Yeah.
What's that been like?
I found myself, because of a few different reasons, but yes, all of this made me go, you're not promised anything. You're not promised another album. You're not promised another day. So do the most and the best job you can, from production to who you're working with to all those things. So that's on the technical side. But then writing wise, I wanted to do the same thing. It's like, Anthony, don't try to fit the formula anymore. You were made unique for a reason. Like, so just do what you're supposed to be doing, and then the chips will start to fall. And I think with the new music, it's starting to show itself in that way, where the opportunities are already opening up because people can tell. Like, I played this music for Kirk Franklin, who's one of my mentors, and he was like, this one's different. This one's different. I don't know what you did, why you did it this way, but there's something different about this. And so do everything you can to put this at another level. And all it was I think this album is coming from a more healed place, and it's showing itself. Like the work in the training room is now showing itself on the floor because of that.
Yet again, we're back to where we started, because the very first thing you said when we started this conversation was talking about outpouring from either obligation or being filled up. And so for a guy like Kirk to say that to you, and for you as the writer, as the artist, to recognize a level of depth and authenticity, it's really cool to see. And it is to say, and folks, I hope you can take this to whatever you're walking through in life. Listen, nothing's wasted. And we're not ascribing authorship of the sickness and the disease and the garbage to the Lord at all. We're just saying, listen, a heart turned toward him, an ear that is inclined to the still small voice. Nothing's wasted, right?
Nope, nothing is wasted. The hardest of days, and we'll know in glory when we get to heaven why God would allow certain hard things, but those hard things in his hands become something all the way different. And he will not waste a thing. like a thing at all. My mom was the master at taking leftovers and making them something amazing. She would take leftovers. We didn't even know it was leftovers. She'd put it out, she'd pull it out, put it in a casserole dish, like pour a cream of mushroom over it and like put cheese on it, give it some French sounding name. And we were like in awe that it was it was like this, wow, did you even make this? We were not aware that it was just leftovers in the hands of a master. And when we put our leftovers from our grief, from our hurt, from our pain, we put that in the hands of a master, he does something to it. He pours his spirit on it, and he reframes it into something that we never thought possible. That is what faith added to your hurt will do.
That's so powerful. Anything else today, Anthony? You're awesome. I'm so glad we got to talk again today.
Thanks. I'm glad to be able to talk with you too. And I love that we got to kind of go to the depths of why the new music will sound the way it sounds, why the messages are there. And I would love, that's it. Just everybody when they listen now, they'll be hearing the songs from this place. Even if it's a celebratory fun song, it's like it took work to get to this song, to get to this authentic place of, so.
Yeah, well, I'm going to put links in the show notes, guys, to all of Anthony's music. But Anthony, anything else today? This has been so fun. You have a show tonight?
Yeah, we're in Denver tonight, and then I fly to Virginia tomorrow to do Liberty University, and then back to Oakland after that. It's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh, good. Well, man, it's so good to see you. Anything else today?
Great to see you. No, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
Tell people where to connect, and we'll get you out of here.
On any social platform at Anthony Evans Jr. That's at Anthony Evans Jr. Or Anthony-Evans.com is my website, Anthony-Evans.com. But
awesome. And of course, folks, show notes at wintoday.tv. But Anthony, thank you a ton. It's so good to see you, dude.
Thank you. Great to see you too. I appreciate your time.